Pack your trash and get out, Walter. Your software is ours now. Ryan sneered, tossing the pink slip directly at my chest. The heavy cardstock struck my jacket and fluttered to the polished mahogany floor of the executive boardroom. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam my fists. I simply looked into the eyes of the 32-year-old MBA graduate who had inherited a manufacturing empire he did not build, and I smiled. I bent down, picked up the paper, and walked out into the chilly November air. Sitting in the driver's seat of my pickup truck, I opened my ruggedized laptop, connected to my personal server, and opened the source repository for VanceLink. With a single click of my physical security key, I revoked the active licensing certificate. The countdown had begun, and by Monday morning, their entire $12 million automated assembly system would become nothing more than a collection of expensive, silent metal blocks. To understand how a 52-year-old automation engineer ended up in a parking lot launching a full-scale corporate lockout, you have to go back 15 years. In 2011, I was hired by Richard Caldwell, the original founder of Caldwell Automotive Parts. Back then, the company was a chaotic, grease-stained operation located in the industrial heart of Ohio. We manufactured precision transmission gears for the big Detroit automakers. The factory floor was a loud, hazardous maze of legacy hydraulic presses, manual lathes, and outdated relays. Richard was a brilliant mechanical mind, but he was drowning in the digital age. He knew that if the company did not modernize, it would be crushed by overseas competitors. That was where I came in. I had already spent 15 years in the trenches of industrial automation, programming PLCs and designing SCADA monitoring systems. When Richard brought me on board as the chief automation engineer, he gave me a blank check and a simple mandate: drag this factory into the 21st century. For the next decade and a half, the factory floor became my canvas. I lived and breathed ladder logic, Ethernet networks, and electrical schematics. I replaced the manual presses with state-of-the-art automated CNC machining centers. I installed Siemens S7-1500 programmable logic controllers to govern the precise movement of every robotic arm. I ran miles of shielded Profinet cable through the overhead cable trays, linking the machinery to a central control room where a custom-designed SCADA system monitored temperature, pressure, and cycle times in real time. But as the factory grew more complex, we hit a massive bottleneck. The factory floor used industrial protocols like OPC UA and Modbus to communicate at the microsecond level. Meanwhile, the front office ran on a standard enterprise resource planning database to manage customer orders, raw steel inventory, and shipping manifests. The two systems spoke entirely different languages. The corporate database could not tell the machines which gear specification to cut next, and the machines could not report back when a batch was finished. The corporate software vendors wanted $300,000 plus a $50,000 annual maintenance fee to write a custom bridge between the office and the factory floor. Even then, they would not guarantee it would work with our legacy machinery. Richard Caldwell told me we simply could not afford it. The margins on automotive parts were razor thin, and committing that much cash would put our cash flow in the red. So, I did what any passionate engineer would do. I spent my evenings, weekends, and holidays writing the bridge myself. I developed a proprietary middleware software wrapper that I named VanceLink. VanceLink was a lightweight, incredibly efficient service written in C++ that sat on our local network gateway. It listened to raw TCP/IP sockets from the Siemens PLCs, translated the hex codes into clean SQL database queries, and fed them directly into the corporate ERP system. It did the work of a $300,000 enterprise software package, but it did it faster, with zero latency, and with custom error handling that I built specifically for our factory's unique quirks. When I showed Richard the prototype and demonstrated a fully automated order-to-shipping pipeline, he was ecstatic. We tested it on a single line, and it worked flawlessly. Within 3 months, VanceLink was handling the data routing for all 6 automated assembly lines. It became the central nervous system of Caldwell Automotive Parts. If VanceLink stopped running, the office could not send production schedules to the shop floor, and the automated forklifts would not know which shipping docks to load. Because I wrote this software entirely on my own time, using my personal development machine, and without using any company resources, I held the intellectual property rights. I was not a software developer by contract. My job description was strictly limited to physical plant operations and electrical engineering. I consulted with my intellectual property attorney, who advised me to license VanceLink to Caldwell Automotive Parts, rather than selling it outright. Richard and I sat down and signed a software licensing agreement. Under the terms of the contract, I granted the company a non-exclusive, revocable, monthly active license to use the VanceLink executable. The license fee was set at a nominal rate of $1 per month, purely to make it a legally binding contract. The critical clause was Clause 14C. It stated that if my employment with the company was terminated for any reason other than documented gross negligence or voluntary resignation, or if the company defaulted on any agreed-upon compensation contracts, I retained the absolute right to revoke the software license with a 24-hour notice. For years, that agreement sat quietly in a metal filing cabinet. Richard paid me a fair salary, and we built the business together. By 2024, our annual revenue had climbed to $48 million, and we were shipping over 150,000 precision gears every single week. But Richard was getting tired. His health was failing, and 6 months ago he decided to retire, handing the reins of the company over to his nephew, Ryan Caldwell. Ryan was a newly minted MBA who viewed the factory floor not as a collection of skilled workers and carefully tuned machines, but as a spreadsheet of expenses that needed to be aggressively pruned. He arrived with a team of junior consultants, and within his first week, he made it clear that he had no respect for the people who had built the company. And that was when the trouble started. Ryan Caldwell believed that seniority was just another word for inefficiency. He was 32, wore tailored suits that looked out of place in a grease-laden gear plant, and spoke in a rapid-fire stream of corporate buzzwords. His first order of business was to hire a boutique management consultancy firm to analyze our operations. These 20-something consultants spent 3 weeks walking the floor with clipboards, looking at our automated lines. They did not understand how the Siemens PLCs coordinated with the shipping docks, nor did they care. All they saw was that the chief automation engineer, me, spent a significant portion of his day sitting in a quiet office monitoring screens rather than manually turning wrenches. To Ryan and his consultants, my high salary and the specialized bonuses built into my contract were low-hanging fruit for cost-cutting. They did not realize that the reason I was sitting in my office was because the system I had built ran so smoothly that it rarely required emergency intervention. They mistook proactive engineering for idleness. The real conflict began when we neared the completion of the Phase 6 automation project. This was the crown jewel of my 15-year career at the company, the complete automation of our high-volume transmission gear assembly line. It was designed to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with minimal human supervision, boosting our daily production capacity by 25%. The contract for this project, which Richard Caldwell had signed and executed 2 years prior, contained a very specific performance incentive. If the Phase 6 line reached a sustained production volume of 5,000 units per day within a 90-day testing window, I would be awarded a one-time automation bonus of $500,000. It was a steep target, but we hit it. 2 weeks before Ryan took over, the Phase 6 line successfully completed its 90-day trial, averaging 5,200 units per day. The data was verified, the audits were complete, and the financial returns were already showing up on the company's balance sheets. Under the terms of the agreement, my $500,000 bonus was scheduled to be paid out on November 15th during the mid-month payroll cycle, but Ryan had no intention of paying that bonus. To him, $500,000 was a massive dent in his first quarter profitability report, which he wanted to present to the board to prove his leadership efficiency. On the morning of November 10th, 5 days before the bonus was due, I received a calendar invite for a meeting in the executive boardroom. The subject was simply listed as operational alignment. When I arrived, Ryan was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by Bradley Stone, the company's human resources director. Bradley was a career HR manager who had spent the last 10 years nodding in agreement with whoever held the CEO title. On the table between them lay a thick manila folder. "Sit down, Walter," Ryan said, not looking up from his tablet. I took a seat across from him. "Morning, Ryan. Bradley, what's on the agenda?" Ryan closed his tablet with a sharp snap and leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Walter, we've been reviewing the plant's operational expenses, specifically the labor cost allocations for the automation department. To be frank, the numbers don't make sense. Your base salary is at the very top of the market rate, and then we have this legacy bonus clause from my uncle's tenure regarding the Phase 6 line." "It's not a legacy clause, Ryan," I replied calmly. "It's a contractually binding performance incentive. I spent 2 years designing, programming, and testing the Phase 6 automation. The line is currently generating an additional $160,000 in daily production value. The bonus is due this Friday. The company cannot justify paying a $500,000 bonus to a single employee for doing their job," Ryan said, his voice tightening. "The automation is already complete, the software is running, the machines are calibrated. We've had a consulting firm analyze your daily activity, and they've concluded that your role has transitioned into a standard maintenance function. We can hire a junior technician for a third of your salary to monitor the SCADA panels. The software running those machines is VanceLink," I reminded him. "I wrote it and I maintain it. A junior technician wouldn't know where to start if the data mapping fails." Ryan chuckled, a condescending sound that made Bradley Stone shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Walter, let's not overcomplicate things. You wrote some code. It's on our servers. It belongs to the company. We've done a code audit, and our IT consultants assure us that the software is stable and requires no active development. Therefore, we are restructuring the department. Effective immediately, your position as Chief Automation Engineer is eliminated due to redundancy." Bradley Stone reached into the manila folder and slid a set of documents across the table. "Here is your severance package, Walter. It offers 4 weeks of base pay, contingent on you signing a standard release of liability and waiver of any outstanding bonus claims." I looked down at the documents, then back up at Ryan. "So you're firing me to pocket the bonus?" "We are optimizing the company's cost structure," Ryan corrected, his eyes cold. "You have until 5 p.m. today to sign the waiver and pack your personal belongings. If you don't sign, we will terminate you for cause, citing non-compliance with operational directives, and you won't get a dime of severance." I felt the anger flare in my chest, but I kept my face blank. I had spent 15 years building this company's technical backbone. I had saved them millions in software licensing and consulting fees, and now this arrogant kid was trying to rob me of my hard-earned bonus and throw me out like a piece of obsolete machinery. "I won't be signing that," I said quietly. "That's your choice," Ryan sneered, "but it doesn't change the fact that you're done here. Pack your things. Bradley will escort you to your desk." "Understood," I said. I stood up, left the severance documents on the table, and walked out of the room. I did not make a scene. I did not yell. I knew exactly what was written in the metal filing cabinet in my office, and I knew that Ryan Caldwell had just made the biggest mistake of his short professional life. Bradley Stone followed me down to my ground floor office, like a prison guard escorting an inmate. I ignored his nervous presence and began packing my personal belongings into a single cardboard box. I did not touch the company-owned desktop computer or the tools purchased with the plant's budget. However, I made sure to pack my personal notebooks, my collection of reference manuals, and, most importantly, my physical security key, a small USB device that held my private encryption credentials. I also reached into my bottom drawer and pulled out the original signed copy of the software licensing agreement from 2011. Bradley watched me slide it into the box, completely unaware of what that piece of paper represented. Once I cleared my desk, I handed over my keycard. Bradley escorted me to the main exit, murmuring a canned HR script about wishing me the best in my future endeavors. I walked out into the crisp Ohio afternoon, placed the box in the passenger seat of my truck, and drove straight to the offices of Miller and Associates in downtown Dayton. Roger Miller had been my personal attorney for over a decade. He was a sharp, meticulous lawyer who specialized in intellectual property and corporate contracts. I had consulted him before signing the original licensing agreement with Richard Caldwell 15 years ago. I sat down in Roger's office and placed the cardboard box on his desk, pulling out the 2011 software licensing agreement. I explained the situation. The Phase 6 line had met its targets. The $500,000 bonus was contractually due. The new CEO had fired me to avoid paying it, and they had demanded I sign a waiver to receive a meager 4-week severance package. Roger put on his reading glasses, flipped to the back of the agreement, and read the signature page. Then he turned to Clause 14C. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "Walter, did they have their corporate legal team review your file before they handed you this pink slip?" Roger asked, tapping the page with his pen. "I doubt it," I replied. "Ryan Caldwell is convinced that, since the software is installed on their local servers, it belongs to them. He thinks I'm just an old engineer who doesn't understand modern business." "Well, his ignorance is about to cost him dearly," Roger said. "Clause 14C is crystal clear. The license is active on a month-to-month basis, contingent on the licensee's compliance with all outstanding compensation agreements and your continued employment. If you are terminated without cause, or if they default on any agreed-upon compensation, which they did the moment they declared they would not pay your performance bonus, you have the absolute right to revoke the license. You only need to provide 24 hours written notice." "How quickly can we draft the notice?" I asked. "I'll have it ready in 20 minutes, Roger said, already typing on his computer. "We will hand-deliver it to their corporate headquarters and send a copy via certified mail to their legal department. The clock will start ticking the moment they sign for it." While Roger drafted the legal notice, I sat in his office and thought about the technical mechanism I had built into VanceLink. I had never designed the software as a malicious weapon. I had designed it as an engineer who understood the importance of digital rights management. VanceLink ran as a background service on the plant's main server. Every hour, the service checked a local cryptographic file, a digital license certificate that was signed with my private key. If the certificate was valid, the software continued routing data between the Siemens S7 1500 PLCs and the corporate database. If the certificate expired, was missing, or was revoked, the software wrapper would immediately halt its translation routines, log a license revocation error, and enter a passive standby mode. Because the code was compiled and encrypted, their internal IT team could not simply modify the executable to bypass the license check. If they tried to decompile it, they would trigger the software's integrity protection, which would wipe the configuration mapping files entirely. The only way to run the software was with a valid, active certificate signed by my private key. At 4 p.m. that afternoon, Roger's courier hand-delivered the formal notice of license revocation to the front desk of Caldwell Automotive Parts. It was addressed directly to Ryan Caldwell and the head of the corporate legal department. The notice stated that due to a material breach of contract, specifically the refusal to pay the contractually guaranteed Phase 6 performance bonus, the license for the VanceLink software wrapper was officially revoked, effective at 4 p.m. On November 11th, I drove back to my house, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my personal laptop. I logged into the secure, remote server that hosted my private key infrastructure. I pulled up the active certificate registry for Caldwell Automotive Parts. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I thought about the 15 years I had dedicated to that factory, the late nights I had spent tracking down electrical shorts, and the mutual respect I had shared with Richard Caldwell. But Richard was gone, and the company was now run by a man who valued a spreadsheet over human decency. I clicked the Revoke button. On my screen, the status of the CAP certificate changed from active to revoked. The revocation list was immediately pushed to the local server at the plant via a secure network handshake that had been active since I set up the gateway. The 24-hour countdown had officially begun. The plant would run smoothly through the night and into the next day. But at exactly 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, the digital bridge would collapse, and Ryan Caldwell's spreadsheet would start bleeding red. At exactly 4 p.m. on Wednesday, November 11th, I was sitting on my back porch sipping a hot cup of coffee. At that very microsecond, miles away at the Caldwell Automotive Parts plant, the local gateway server queried the license certificate registry. It detected the revocation flag. True to its programming, VanceLink immediately ceased its translation loops, logged a license revoked by owner code in the system log, and went dormant. The digital bridge collapsed. The S7-1500 PLCs on all 6 assembly lines continued to run their local physical routines, but they could no longer transmit completion data to the central database. When the robotic arms finished assembling a transmission gear, they waited for the SQL server to verify the serial number and assign the next batch specification. The database was silent. Because the PLCs received no response, the safety protocols took over, halting the conveyor belts to prevent gear pileups. Within 5 minutes, the entire factory floor went quiet. The constant hum of pneumatic valves and electric motors was replaced by the flashing yellow warning lights on the automation panels. In the shipping department, the situation was even worse. The automated forklifts, which relied on database instructions to locate and move finished pallets to the loading docks, sat motionless in their charging bays. The shipping manifests could not print. Outside, a line of flatbed semi-trucks began to back up along the access road, their drivers honking their horns in frustration. We shipped to major automotive assembly plants in Detroit that operated on a strict just-in-time inventory system. Under our contract, every day we failed to deliver our quota of transmission gears resulted in a $50,000 contract breach penalty. By 4:15 p.m., my phone began to buzz. The caller ID showed the number for the plant's IT department. I let it ring. A minute later, a call came from the plant manager. I let that ring too. Then came a series of text messages from former colleagues asking if I knew why the database bridge was down. I remained silent. At 5 p.m., Ryan Caldwell's name appeared on my screen. I declined the call. He called back 3 more times, followed by 2 calls from Bradley Stone. I muted my phone, put it on the kitchen counter, and went to make dinner. By the time I checked my phone before bed, I had 12 missed calls, 4 voicemails, and 3 urgent emails demanding my immediate assistance. On Thursday morning at 9 a.m., Ryan called again. This time, I decided to answer. "Walter," Ryan shouted, his voice cracking with tension. "Where have you been? The entire plant is down. We've lost over $150,000 in production since yesterday, and Detroit is threatening to fine us $50,000 for missing our morning delivery. The IT department says they can't get the database bridge to connect. You need to get down here and fix this bug immediately." "It's not a bug, Ryan," I said calmly. "It's a feature. The software wrapper has entered a standby state because its license was revoked." "What the hell are you talking about?" Ryan barked. "You don't own the software. It's on our servers. You wrote it while you were an employee here. We've already contacted our legal team, and we will sue you for sabotage and corporate espionage if you don't turn it back on right now." "I suggest you actually talk to your legal team before you make threats," I replied. "Ask them to look at the hand-delivered notice they signed for yesterday at 4 p.m. and tell them to check the 2011 software licensing agreement signed by Richard Caldwell. I wrote VanceLink on my own time, on my own hardware, and licensed it to the company. You breached that agreement when you refused to pay my automation bonus. Therefore, under Clause 14C, the license is revoked." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Ryan breathing heavily. "We will bypass it," Ryan finally said, his voice shaking. "We have a team of external software consultants arriving in an hour. They will write a new bridge by the end of the day. Good luck to them," I said. "The database schema is proprietary and the PLC interfaces are encrypted. Even if they are brilliant, it will take them at least 3 weeks to reverse engineer my database mappings and write a stable replacement from scratch. At a $50,000 a day penalty plus $160,000 in lost daily production, that's going to be a very expensive 3 weeks. Have a nice day, Ryan." I hung up the phone before he could reply. For the next 4 hours, I worked. In my garden, I knew exactly what was happening at the plant. The external consultants would be staring at millions of lines of compiled assembly code, realizing they couldn't bypass the cryptographic check without wiping the configuration files. Ryan's panic would be reaching a fever pitch as the Detroit assembly plants threatened to halt their own production lines due to our lack of parts. At 1 p.m., my phone rang again. It was Bradley Stone, the HR director. His arrogant tone from the previous day was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, placating voice. "Walter, please," Bradley said. "We need to resolve this. Ryan is under a lot of pressure. The board is calling. The legal department has reviewed the 2011 agreement, and they've advised us that, well, they've advised us that we need to settle this with you immediately. What is it going to take to get the license reinstated?" I sat down at my desk and pulled out a sheet of paper where I had written down my terms. "It's very simple, Bradley. I will reinstate the license under 3 conditions. First, my $500,000 automation bonus must be paid in full via a certified bank check. Second, I will not return as an employee. Instead, I will be hired as an independent consultant on a 1-year contract with an upfront retainer of $150,000 to handle system maintenance. Third, Ryan Caldwell must sign a full mutual release of liability, ensuring the company cannot pursue any legal action against me for this lockout. $150,000 on top of the bonus?" Bradley gasped. "Walter, that's highway robbery." "No, Bradley," I replied. "That's market rate for a critical systems architect. You have until 5 p.m. today to wire the funds and send the signed contracts. If you don't, I will delete the encryption keys from my personal server, and your consultants can start their 3-week coding project." At 4:45 p.m. on Thursday, just 15 minutes before my final deadline, my attorney Roger Miller called me. His voice was steady and professional, but I could hear the satisfaction in his tone. "Walter, the wire transfer has cleared," Roger announced. "$650,000 is currently sitting in our escrow account. $500,000 for the outstanding phase 6 automation bonus, and $150,000 for the first-year consulting retainer. I also have the signed copies of the consulting agreement and the mutual release of liability, signed by Ryan Caldwell and witnessed by the corporate secretary. You are officially cleared of any liability, and you have been paid every single dollar you were owed." "Excellent work, Roger," I said. "Thank you. I'm uploading the new license key now." "Enjoy the retirement, Walter," Roger chuckled. "Or rather, enjoy the consulting gig. You've earned it." I hung up, opened my laptop, and generated a new cryptographic license certificate signed with my private key. I set the expiration date for exactly 1 year from today. I uploaded the certificate to the plant's gateway server. Within 30 seconds, the VanceLink background service detected the new valid certificate. The translation routines re-initialize. The stored queue of database queries began to process, clearing out the backlog in less than 2 minutes. On the plant floor, the conveyor belts hummed back to life. The Siemens PLCs green-lighted the robotic arms, which immediately began moving with hydraulic precision. The automated forklifts zoomed out of their charging bays to clear the pileup at the end of the assembly lines, and the shipping printer began spitting out manifests for the waiting trucks. Although the factory was running again, the damage to Ryan Caldwell's reputation was already done. The 24-hour shutdown had cost Caldwell Automotive Parts over $300,000 in lost production, plus $50,000 in contract breach fines to our primary client in Detroit. Combined with thus $650,000 they had to pay me to resolve the situation, Ryan's cost-saving measure had ended up costing the company over $1 million in less than 48 hours. The board of directors, which was made up of original investors who had backed Richard Caldwell for decades, was absolutely furious. They had not been informed of Ryan's plan to eliminate my position, nor had they been told about the software licensing agreement that governed the factory's operation. They only found out about the situation when our major client in Detroit called the board members directly, threatening to cancel their multi-million-dollar purchasing contract if the factory didn't resume shipping immediately. On Friday morning, an emergency board meeting was called. I was not there, but I received a full report from Richard Caldwell later that afternoon. Richard called me from his home in Florida. He sounded older, his voice slightly raspy, but there was a warmth in it that had been missing during his final months at the company. "Walter," Richard said, sighing deeply, "I want to apologize for my nephew's behavior. The boy is smart with spreadsheets, but he doesn't understand that a company is built on trust and respect, not just numbers. When I handed him the reins, I expected him to build on what we created, not tear it down to feed his own ego. I appreciate that, Richard, I replied. I didn't want to shut the plant down. I spent 15 years building those lines. But I couldn't let him walk away with my bonus and my software. You did exactly what you had to do, Richard said firmly. You protected your work. The board met this morning, and we voted to remove Ryan as CEO. He has been stripped of his operational authority and sent back to Chicago. We are bringing in a professional manufacturing executive who actually knows how a factory floor works, and I made sure they understand that your consulting contract is untouchable. We need you, Walter. We always did. Thanks, Richard, I said. Tell the new guy he can call me anytime. My retainer covers 20 hours of remote maintenance a month. Anything beyond that is $250 an hour. Richard laughed, a hearty sound that echoed through the receiver. He'll pay it, Walter. Believe me, he'll pay it. In the weeks that followed, the plant returned to its normal rhythm. The new CEO, a veteran plant manager named Keith Peterson, visited the facility and immediately sat down with the engineering team. He respected the systems we had built and made no attempt to alter the software configuration. Under my consulting agreement, I only had to log into the system once a week from the comfort of my home to monitor the server logs and ensure the database queues were running smoothly. It was a comfortable routine that paid me $150,000 a year for what amounted to about 5 hours of work a week. As for Ryan Caldwell, his corporate career in manufacturing was effectively over. Word travels fast in the Ohio automotive supply chain. A CEO who shuts down his own factory and costs his company $1 million just to avoid paying an engineering bonus is not someone anyone wants to hire. Last I heard, he was working as a mid-level analyst at a consulting firm in Chicago, far away from any real machinery. Sometimes when I'm sitting on my porch on a quiet afternoon, I look at the small physical security key sitting on my desk. It is a tiny piece of plastic and metal, but it represents the power of expertise. In the modern corporate world, executives often think they can treat the people who build and maintain their systems as disposable assets. They forget that the digital age is built on code, and the people who write that code hold the keys to the castle. Ryan Caldwell thought he could play corporate chess with an engineer, but he forgot that I was the one who built the board.